Hey, everybody. My name is Jeremy Francesi. Thanks so much for stopping by. Welcome to the Marketing Water Cooler Podcast. Steph, what are we getting into today?
Let's talk about some ways to see if your organization is ready to hire a third-party marketing agency.
Cool. So a couple of things to think about, right? There's three key things: finance, partnership, vision. Okay, we'll get right into this. When you go from nothing to something, or you're maybe with an agency or a third-party vendor and it's not really working or performing, these are the three things I'd consider internally with your team to figure out, like, are we at a good point? Are we at a point where we can take on a vendor, right? I think one point that people need to remember is, like, because you have dreams and you have growth goals doesn't mean you now have more time in your schedule, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I always ask decision makers and CEOs and executives, like when we're getting to the tail end, is like, hey, knowing we're moving forward with this, how are you going to handle the increase of obligation? So there's certain things you want to think about, and I call it the breaking the relationship, right? I always try to break, I want to break the relationship before we start it so we can get all those things out of the way, right?
Right.
In a healthy way, right? In a really, really healthy way in my experience, these are things that cause some complications. But finance, partnership, vision. Here, let me break these down for you. Finances, a couple of things you want to think about, right? It's what can you afford and justify investing in this initiative? And also, what do you actually need relative to the cost, right? There's companies out there that have a floor of $50,000 a month because they only really work with Fortune 1000 companies. Mm-hmm. Then everything down from that scales, right? The average cost for digital marketing services in 2021 is between $2,500 and $12,000 a month, right? Or $50 to $500 an hour in services. And so when you look at the numbers, here are some things to consider when it comes to the economics of it. Okay, we talked about this on a previous episode. The United States, what was the study? Let me pull up my handy dandy notebook. The United States Small Business Administration, the US SBA, right? They talked about spending should be 7 to 8% of gross revenue for marketing and advertising if you're doing less than $5 million a year in sales, and your net profit margin after expenses is in the 10%, 12% range, right? So let me put real figures behind that. Let me pull out my calculator and we'll do a little math here. Okay. So if you're doing $5 million top line and you're thinking, let's say 7%, right? Then that means, in theory, give or take $250,000 and up is your range, 250 to 350, right? A little bit more, but to be honest, I think, especially if you're going from nothing to something, I think you should consider. So let's say you're doing, say, $2.5 million in revenue, say 7% of that, just under $200,000 in revenue. Okay. So now you know the industry average for small businesses doing under $5 million a year. Okay. About 200,000. So now you have can you actually allocate $200,000? Just because that's what the country's doing doesn't mean you have the working capital to do that. Mm-hmm. Money has to come from somewhere. Right. So one thing is, from the finance side, are you prepared to do it? Because here's the thing to keep in mind. It's not that you can't spend a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 and get a return or get value, but you have to decide where you're at in the marketing journey. Are you testing and trying, or are you committing and going? Mm-hmm. That's why I like doing contracts in many cases. It's not because I want you to have to sign a contract and say, we're doing this for 6 months or a year. It's because with certain clients that are going from nothing to something, if you can't think about doing this for 12 months, I know you're not serious.
Sure.
And you got to be able to, you can't go from having literally zero infrastructure to a real infrastructure by changing the plan every 4 weeks.
Right.
You have to develop a plan. So the first part is, based on the finances, what can you afford to do? What can you justify? And based on that, what can it get you? Right. Mm-hmm. Once you have that in mind, I think the next question is, what type of relationship you want. Do you want to do project-based work where it's like, hey, year one, we can afford to spend $200,000 in marketing. Let's just do projects as we go. We'll learn about it. We'll work with different people. You'll taste different relationships and you'll learn what works and what doesn't. Maybe that's an avenue, but that touches under the second pillar, which is partnerships, meaning what resources do you have in place to link to the third party? An outside vendor has to have a way to integrate with who you are as a company. Mm-hmm. Creative is creative. They're not just going to send you an email that's perfect.
Sure.
We did 12 or 13 websites this month. Half a dozen case studies, probably 12 to 15 marketing flyers to support a business development effort. And that was like one client. like what, one or two clients.
Right.
And so the reason I say that is like, do you think all that gets done, marked complete, authorized, goes live, pushes to production without any client involvement? Of course
I hope not.
Of course not, right? Of course not, right? And so there's an element of understanding based on what you need out of the relationship. Do you have pieces in play to support the vendor and the partnership to the best of your ability? If you don't have that, then it's gonna, you either have, then that's I'll kind of caveat over it. Like, then you have to make one of two decisions. You either have to pay them enough to be the decision maker, your CMO, your head of marketing, where they do not need the client approval to push things to the internet, push things to the client, production, push the website live with updates. You either need to pay them enough and give them the co-signing ability to be the decision maker so that you're not the one in the way, or you have to have the pieces in play to support them in the best way possible, which means somebody that's a creative lead, potentially somebody that's a technical lead. If you're in an industry, like we have a cyber firm, right? They have a creative lead and a technical lead. When it gets really immersed in cyber, we have a different contact because the person that has branding and that type of a background and they love that stuff, they don't necessarily have the biggest, the deepest background in the intimacy of cybersecurity and different protocols.
Right.
So you have to understand, do we have the pieces in play to adequately support the partner? And then the last thing is vision. Do you know what you're trying to accomplish by hiring a third-party agency? Are you trying to move faster, or are you trying to become more visible? Are you trying to drive leads to your sales team, or are you trying to simply create content to share on social? It's not about knowing definitively, but it is about having a vision, because their job is to help you develop the best version of the vision. But if you have no idea what you want, it's kind of like that dating scenario where you go over and you're like, where do you want to eat? And they're like, I don't really know. And they're like, well, I don't know where to go now. Right? Kind of like joking around a little bit. I feel like we get a little serious on this podcast. But it's
back
like
and forth with the, I don't know what I want.
Yeah, it's like, well, I don't know what
I don't know what.
And then the agency's like, well, do you want Chinese? And you're like, well, I don't really know. And then you're like, do you want pizza? You're like, I like pizza, but I don't really know if I'm in the mood. I had that last Thursday, right? And you go through that process, and it's like you don't get anywhere, but it's not because the agency's not trying their hardest to help you. It's that you don't know how to help yourself.
Sure.
So you don't have to know everything, but you do have to have something to bring to the table. And that could be ideas and saying, I think about this. We saw this from a competitor and we really liked it. But if you have no clue about the finances and it's not about budget. It's about like, how do you make sense of the relationship if you have no idea what you can spend and invest in it?
Right.
Because an agency may come to you and say, it's $10,000 a month, a year-long contract, 120 grand. And you're like, oh, we just needed a $150 logo. Right. You got to get the finances a little bit squared away so you can make sense of the conversation. Right. Nothing's real until you know how much it costs. I'm a big believer in that. That's why when our first conversation started, I'll tell you, like, this is the range based on what I know, but it could be less, it could be more, but based on what I know today about this possible relationship, this is where we're going. Got to get the financial picture clear as day as you can. The second, partnership. Are you able to support the vendor in the optimal capacity, technical and creative? You need something in place, right? Otherwise, it's not that it can't work, but it will be much more challenging. Or you need to hire an agency, co-sign them as the decision maker, pay them enough to be the authority, and then they bypass you as the person that is saying yay and nay on what is done and not done and the direction of the vision. And then the last part is vision. What direction are we heading in? And then how does it all come together? If you're able to put those three assets together, I promise you'll be able to have a confident evaluation process when you're looking for a partnership. If you don't, it's not that it can't be done. It just means that you're going to probably spend a lot more time evaluating firms, and you're more likely to get burned because somebody's going to sell you on a great portfolio and great ads, great conversion, but that may not be what you need at the end of the day or what you're ready for. So get the finances a little bit clear, understand if you have the pieces in play, have a clear idea of the vision, and then kind of balls in your court, so to speak, on like how fast or slow do you want to go and getting it up and running. What would you add? Anything you add? Anything that you want to poke in there we can unpack?
I'm just sort of wondering, for people who are maybe, I feel like it nowadays a very common role is like a social media manager. How do you know when like your company has a social media manager, they run like the LinkedIn page and the Facebook and the Instagram? How do you know when it's time to essentially graduate to a bigger agency?
It's a great question. And so look, I'll say this. If you have a social media manager, for example, because that's a pretty common first step of like, we have nothing, we don't know what to do, but we want to start turning on the lights of the house. That way people know we're home. Hire a social media manager, they do some graphic design, maybe they do a little bit of writing. Look, if they're motivated and they're committed to development, I would do everything you can to grow them and sculpt them and have them lead them, get them involved, right? I think there's so much opportunity in hiring a really good quality first marketer in your team, but they have to want to try things. They have to want to develop. They have to want to go do it. So if they're just sitting there trying to make some copy and some social and like kind of check the box, then that's where you start to think about what's the ultimate question, which is, what are we trying to accomplish?
Right.
Now, there is a balance between, just start, which is always the right scenario, and knowing when to transition from just being active because it's better to start than not start. And then realizing you're just going through the motions because you don't want to stop.
Right.
That's where you have to figure out, what are we accomplishing? We're spending $45,000 a year on a social media manager. It's not creating any revenue. We're putting out a post every 3 days on LinkedIn. It's not that creative. We're not that impressed by it. We love the person. He or she's wonderful as a culture ad, and we do nothing but enjoy their presence, but it's not really adding an impact to the company.
Right.
That's where you have to figure out, how do we support them in a way that creates all added value? Do they have the tools in place to be productive? Right? If they're doing everything in a design environment where they're actually a good designer, but they don't have the tools to create, well, then maybe that's the limiting belief. Maybe you don't need an agency. Maybe you need to get them an Adobe Creative Cloud and say, here's, a $56 a month creative suite, and here's $250 a month in classes, training, tutorials, and everything you can imagine to help really foster a well groomed design role, maybe. And then you spend time using Gong software to record your sales calls, where now they spend 15% of their time listening to all the sales calls, so they understand the product and the client more. The other 15% is training and development on the actual creative skill set. And now they have the tools to be a really strong, productive member of the team. And then all of a sudden, maybe it turns the lights on, and maybe you don't need an agency for any of that, but you do need to figure out what's the thing holding you back from getting where you're going. And that's where it comes down to. If you don't know what you're trying to get out of your marketing department, then there's no way to effectively guide that person, because it's like driving without having a destination. Like, there's no efficient way to get through just a casual cruise, because the point was to enjoy the ride. Right. So if you're just moseying around making things on social, you can't hate it when it doesn't create a business value, because nobody put a plan in place that was predicated on customer impact. So if you determine that you're looking for a specific or a different acceleration or measurable impact, that is where you look at, can we build around that person? Maybe they're the link between the agency, third party, and the vendor and us. Or maybe they're simply just somebody doing work that's fine and good culture fit, but they're really not that skilled, and they don't have a vision or a strategic element to bring to the table for like proactive day-to-day development. That's where you start to figure out, I think we need to go outside the shop to find somebody that can help give us structure, give us strategy, give us market research, direction, and insights to narrow the guesswork, so we are knowing more than we're guessing. And then they bring the chops to the table when it comes to really having tools and production infrastructure, right? So it really depends a little bit of those sides. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else before we close up here?
I feel like we've kind of gone over this a little bit, but so what I'm sort of hearing from what you've been saying is that the first thing you should get straight is your vision. You need to know where the train is going before you can put it, start building the tracks, and before you can get the money to start building the tracks, essentially.
Yeah, well said. And I'll say this, that has to come from the executive level. It has to come from a CEO. It has to come from a functional owner who has skin in the business. They have equity ownership, because here's the thing that happens when you don't start it at the executive level. You start doing all this work, and then one of those executives comes in and like, why are we spending $50,000 in marketing? They see nothing but a couple LinkedIn posts. It doesn't connect to a business objective, and they're like, get rid of that.
Right. Right.
And now what you've done is you've made marketing a liability on the company's financials, not an investment for reputation, for revenue, for growth.
Sure.
So what it could start at as simple as this is going to the CEO and saying, look, marketing right now is not as functional and active as I think it could be from a standpoint of the value it can bring to the company. But if I don't know your vision, I don't really know how to use this to create value for your vision. Where do you see the company this time next year? Where do you see it 2 or 3 years from now? Is the goal to sell it, or is the goal to build something really special and keep it? Right? What's the goal? It's really hard to deliver real measurable value if you don't have a purpose. And here's the other thing I'll say, and then we'll close out. When it comes to expanding your marketing internally, even if you don't have a vendor or third party, if you are a functional leader in marketing and you're having like, man, my CEO's not really bought in, what you need to do is spend time building the business case. By spending X, we will acquire Y. When we acquire Y, that gives us Z. When you give them a measurable business case for how giving more money to that part of the company will bring measurable value or potential value, you don't have to lie about it and say, we're going to spend $100,000 and it's going to make us $1 million. But you got to draw a path in a business sense of, look, I think we can create value here. And this is why I think that. Right. Can you allocate this much money to us to start to test this model? It could be for a podcast. It could be for a series of case studies because you realize all of your data shows you're at the lower level of the company and you're not getting up to the ladder to get the stakeholder. And so you're losing the deal because 85% of the decisions are made by a functional owner, and your demos and your pitches and your proposals and your financial overview and contract view is with an end user. So you're not even, you're trying to sell the gatekeeper $1 million product. They have no authority to buy.
Right.
You got to build a business case. Okay. If you can do that, you have opportunity. But it really does start with having a vision and knowing where you're trying to go. And you can't build a business case unless you understand the vision so that your business case supports their vision. Because they need to, it's not just about what they need to give you. You got to give them value. Marketing has to support the growth and the goal for the CEO. So with that in mind, thank you all for stopping by. I think we are going to keep rolling on this track, but we appreciate you stopping by. And so more stuff coming soon. You guys know the deal: Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And Steph, anything you want to add before we close up here?
No, have a lovely day.
You have a lovely day. We'll be back soon. Hey, thanks so much for sticking around to the end. If you liked the video, smash the like button and hit subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the new episodes. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We will fold them into future episodes and make sure that you get the help and the answers you're really looking for all things marketing and communications.